the first year we started, we had what is called a POTS. If you don't know what the word POTS was, a plain old telephone system. If the phone rang, it would be a miracle. You really had to go out and find people who would take your money. You had to, honestly, it was almost like begging them. I think AI is probably going to be the most significant of anything. And I've lived to be here for it. Everything in life is cumulative. This, I really believe it very strongly. People say, how do you raise, and by the way, it's not so simple now, raising money. How did you raise your last fund in 3 months? I say to them, 50 years in 3 months.
Alan, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be I think a real treat for everyone in the room. Alan is truly one of the pioneers of venture capital, not just in New York, not just in the US, the entire globe. I believe you either got the highest civilian award in France because of your contributions to venture capital in France, the most resourceful man in venture capital. So, Alan, let's start with a question that has nothing to do with venture capital. Tell us about New York when you were starting your career.
That's an interesting, I'd say I like that. That's a nice opening. We're live. God, when I'm starting my career when I was born, but I was born in New York. I grew up in New York, and I love to talk about New York. And I really honestly believe I am as much a prototypical New Yorker as anybody you can imagine, because I've been living in New York my entire life, except for my time in the Army. I was in the Army twice, and I also went to Ohio State, went through college in 3 years, so I was 3 years in Ohio. So I guess you take a few years off. So for those of you who don't know, since it's widely circulated, I was 90 yesterday. I was supposed to be running the marathon in 2 weeks, so that's not happening. I did it 2 years ago and was the oldest person that ever finished the marathon in New York. But I thought I could break the record again at 90, but it's not going to happen. Anyway, so I grew up in New York. I was just telling someone yesterday, my kids, when I grew up in New York, if you can imagine, New York, Central Park was our playground. I lived on Central Park West. And I only tell you to get some idea what New York was like. If you went into Central Park, there was never anyone in there. Can you imagine? There was never anybody at Central Park. We used to go sleigh riding in Central Park when there was snow. And that's what the use was, or we'd go bicycle riding occasionally. There were cars, what's now the bikes are where cars were, and there were horses on the horse path. There were 2 or 3 stables around New York, and people used to go horseback riding. So it was used for horseback riding, used for bicycling, and it was used occasionally for running. The word running didn't even exist, though. I mean, I never saw a single person run, except to go catch somebody or
you only ran when you were in
catch
trouble.
A fly. So that's what New York was. When it snowed, in New York, it really used to snow in the winter. I can remember my father. You could park on both sides of the street, and when it snowed heavily, your car was there for the entire winter. And because the plows would come along, and all they did was plow the center and throw the snow on the cars, so you could never get out. And if you wanted, you really had to dig it out. So anyhow, that's what New York was. I rode the subway to work, to school. And so anyhow, that covers my early life in New York. But just to show you my identification in New York, my first job was in New York. My second job was in New York. And in 1967, I actually started New York Magazine and became chairman of the board of that company. So I was a further identification with New York. So I lived in the city and been part of it for my whole growing up. But to translate that to venture, which is really, I think, more perhaps of interest than my sleigh riding, it's amazing. Now, kids, they're lucky if they get once a year to go out with a sleigh, or once every 2 years. When I started at venture capital, my first fund was $2.5 million in 1970. And just to give you an idea, because I was trying to contrast it, I do a lot of talks, and people say, what's it like now compared to what it was like then? I mean, today, by the current firm, Primetime Partners, we get probably 500-600 deals a year to look at. The ratio of doing it is not that much greater, but the opportunities are much greater. Probably 80% of them come into us as opposed from venture capital firms or entrepreneurs. Is this on? Yeah, it is. Yeah. When the first year we started, we had what is called a POTS. If you don't know what the word POTS was, a plain old telephone system. If the phone rang, it would be a miracle. And the telephone never rang. You really had to go out and find people who would take your money. You had to, honestly, it was almost like begging them, please, we want to invest the money. Well, what do you do? What is a venture? The word venture capital really wasn't around. What do you do? Why should I take your money? I don't want a partner. Do I have to have a lawyer? I have to have legal agreements. I have to have accounting. I don't want to. That was the general attitude. It was so early on. Now, maybe the West Coast had started a little earlier, and they probably were a little more advanced in understanding what was required. But if we saw 10, 20 deals in the first year, it would have been enormous. I mean, just to give you a better perspective, I love to tell the story that the first investment I made, it was a company called RSR, Revere Smelting and Refining. It was run by a 26-year-old guy who I'm still very friendly with. He's not 26 anymore. And he had been working for a metals company called American Metals Climax, which was a big metals company at that time. And he had this idea of buying a scrap operation, scrap metal. I mean, the word was scrap. They were called scrappies, people who worked in the scrap. And he was going to buy a scrap mill in New Jersey, which took used batteries, smelt them, refined them, and then separated the antimony and the copper and the lead and recycled it and sold it back to the battery companies and other people who used the metal. And we invested $250,000. And it's just ironic. It makes a wonderful story, but even if it didn't, what I've told you about how desperate we were to find deals, that company today is the largest secondary smelter and refiner in the world. In the world. I have not been an investor in it for a very long time, although I got a very nice note from the founder yesterday, who's still a good friend and an investor in my funds, has been in every fund since I started. But that company does $2 or $3 billion today. It's private. It went public, went private, went public, went private again. It's now private. And it's just ironic. I mean, the second company, just so you don't get carried away, was in this animal feed supplement business, and they went broke. So, I mean, I'm telling this true story. And the third company we did was in the plated wire business, and then we did a company that actually was the precursor of the internet, which did a group of guys who came out of DARPA and saw the future of using communications network to use what became the internet to not to play games, but to communicate. So that's what New York was like. There was no venture capital association there. We were one of the first. The other, Lionel Pincus, I think, started a year before me with Warburg Pincus. Citigroup then formed a Citigroup CVC, and Irving National Bank formed Irving Capital, and I think Bankers Trust started. A lot of names that have disappeared now. But most of the deals were done by the investment firms it was called the deal business when I started. In 1973, we formed the National Venture Capital Association, and then it became a real industry, if you will, mostly focused on the West Coast. I mean, in all honesty, Kleiner Perkins was around that time. Sequoia was around that time. Draper, Gaither, and Anderson, which you probably never heard of, but was probably one of the earliest. And the firm that really gets the most credit for starting the venture business is a guy named General Dorio, who came out of World War II, who was up in Boston and started a company called American Research and Development. And he was a data general. I can't remember. His first company was a very well-known company in the computer business. So that was the nature of the venture business. I don't know. I could tell you a lot more about it. If you really want to talk about New York City, I could go on forever. I love the city. I still believe very strongly in the city, and I watched it change, but stay the same. Truthfully, just more traffic. And I don't know if you read. I was just telling someone a few minutes ago that I just saw there's a proposal that's I think is going to be passed or was passed this week, where they're going to narrow Fifth Avenue and add a pedestrian another lane for pedestrians on each side, and have one bus lane, and it's trying to accommodate more. And the big fight now is what they do about bicycles.
So, Alan, let me ask you something. You started with a $2.5 million fund. What that became, that's Apax.
No, it's Alan Patricof Associates, which is APA. And when I went international, we added the X.
Absolutely. Did you ever imagine it becoming what it is today, which I believe the AUM is close to 80 billion?
Yeah, you're right. It's just about $80 billion. No, who could possibly imagine that? Who could imagine that the venture business would be, I can't remember the numbers. No, maybe there was $20 million raised a year, and to now it's what, $100 billion a year raised for the venture business. It's a totally different business than it was then. No, I didn't have any concept. It was struggling to stay alive and get to a second fund. My second fund was a SBIC fund using government capital, which was, I think, 12.5 million. And then my third fund was 25. And by the fourth fund in the 80s, I've gotten into the 100. But it was slow. I mean, this was a new idea, and it took time for people to accept what was involved in being in the venture business. We didn't have the interesting thing about the most interesting thing, I think, and one of the incentives of getting into it was at that time, there was a very strong over-the-counter small cap market. The NASD was the big deal. And my first IPO, to give you an idea, and I can tell you what happened to that company, was a company we went public, by the way, with New York Magazine in the 80s. We started in 67. We went public. I think it was, no, I'm sorry. We went public in the 70s. The first company I had in my first fund that went public was a company called Datascope. And it went public. It was a medical electronics company. It was doing, I don't know, $2 million in revenues. It went public, and the valuation of the company going public was 10 million total value of the company. And they sold, I believe, $1 million worth of stock to go public. And it was mostly individual buyers. Because if you think about I laughed about it. In today's world, an institutional buyer, which is the major market for any new issue, wants a minimum of 25 million, 50 million, 100 million to establish a position. But imagine, companies would go public for $1 million. Intel, I've written about this places. I can't remember where I've written about it, but Intel went public with, I can't remember, with $25 million they raised, or $60 million valuation or whatever it was. But it was a very vibrant over-the-counter market. For those of you who don't know, over-the-counter market was done by telephone. You had buyers and your sellers. You wanted to sell a stock, you called your broker up, say sell 1,000, sell 100. He had something called the pink sheets. You look on the pink sheets and see who else traded in that stock, unless he made a market in it. And you did it by conversation before there was electronics. Am I making myself sound too old now? But I was there then. And that's how trading was done. And that market, obviously, as the world evolved, small cap stocks, venture capital took over a lot of that role. And that's why you don't see hardly any companies going public with raising a small amount of money. And I worked very hard, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, to try to bring back and recreate an over-the-counter market so that there was more liquidity for most of the companies we invest in. Because the truth is, I mean, I'm assuming we're all in the venture capital business here. You can't raise You can't go public with a company and raise $10 million today. You can't raise, I don't think you can do a public offering probably for less than 50 billion. Is anyone, is that too high or too low? 50 billion?
I think it's even
Low.
low. Yeah.
Okay.
These
All right.
days,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
they're asking for hundreds of.
Yeah. So and that's because the institutional buyers are the major force. So the public love to play in this market, and the only way they could do it is become an investor in a venture capital fund, and then they could complain. I was telling Miguel, I got a letter from one of my investors today, a friendly letter, truthfully, a guy he's been invested with me for 50 years almost, and I can't recreate it, but I thought it was so funny. He wrote it and he said something about your DPI so far is 0.00000. No one's laughing. I mean, it's a 4-year-old fund. How many do you have it better than 0.000 DPI at this point? Raise your hands. Nobody does. Not in the world we've been in the last 4 years. So I wrote him only I can do it because I can get away with anything, but I wrote him a scathing letter about why he should know that a startup fund that's 4 years old that only invests in startups, and that if 0.000 means you avoided the J curve. I mean, that's good. That's good. Anyhow, that's what the market was like then, and we could go public. I went public with Datascope. I think it was $1 million or $2 million offering. Datascope was sold a few years ago for $800 million to a Swedish company. That's a long time, by the way, from when it went public to when companies didn't get sold out every 3 or 4 years. And you didn't have serial entrepreneurs. You had a lot of unsophisticated people, hadn't necessarily been to business school or engineering school. They were just entrepreneurs.
In your mind, what were those seminal moments for the tech and venture capital industry throughout your career so far?
I don't know, seminal moments. I don't know. I guess I like to say I've lived through a lot of what I call revolutions in the investment business. I mean, if you've read my book or you're going to read my book, is you back there?
Yeah, and we have.
You better all read it. No red.
Yeah,
no
we have
red
a few
lights.
copies, and if you scan, you put your address, you're gonna get a free copy. We have enough for everyone
It's
here.
a good read about the venture capital. I got enough feedback to know that it gives you a good feeling of the business. Whereas I was just saying something now about, I think that I've been through up until there weren't very many seminal moments in I guess you'd say the chip revolution, microprocessor in the 70s. Then the personal computer, I was an investor in Apple. Then I was an investor in AOL, which was the beginning of the internet. By the way, Apple, I invested in taking it out of bankruptcy. And Steve Case he was the marketing vice president. He became president. But I went through that whole internet, and it was a game playing company. That's what it started out as, and then evolved into what became AOL. And by the way, to just blow your mind, AOL at last count has 25 million subscribers till today, which will shock you. And has, I am told, 2.5 million people who are paying $15 a month for the subscription. It's owned by Apollo, but it's still around and growing actually today. So I went through that internet. I went through the storage revolution. I went through the cloud revolution. I went through the cellular revolution, which I was very active in, starting the first cellular company. One of the very first was a company we invested in called Cellular Communications. And the first cellular company started up when the government had a lottery. They gave away spectrum to start the cellular business. So you put an application in and you won or you didn't win. We won Columbus, Ohio by accident, and then went to Cleveland and then Michigan, and ended up being in many states, in Puerto Rico and India and Italy and Puerto Rico. I grew that company. So I went through the whole cellular revolution, and there's been so many, if you call them, I call them revolutions, you call them seminal moments when, something comes along and changes things. I mean, the biotech revolution was, to me, spectacular. And I played in that market for a while and found out you needed a lot of capital and you had a lot of endurance and a lot of people who really understood the science, which I eventually decided was for someone else, not me. And now we're going through the AI revolution, and I say that based on what I probably have skipped a couple of revolutions or seminal moments on the way, but I think AI is probably going to be the most significant of anything. And I've lived to be here for it. And I don't count crypto or Bitcoins as that's just something on the way. I don't count that as significant, frankly, although it's playing an important role. Blockchain does and will play even more. But I think the AI revolution, and I am not personally participating in it as an investor in an AI platform company because I think that takes enormous amount of capital. And I haven't described what I'm doing at the moment, but we will participate. Every company we're involved with, every company anyone's involved with today has to have some exposure to what the impact of AI will do in terms of increasing productivity and speed of everything that's going to happen to us. So we haven't discussed yet where I got from Alan Patricof and Associates to Apax. So you want to ask me that, or shall I ask myself?
No, that's next. That was coming up.
Usually I get asked why I left Apax. I left Apax in around 2000 when I just lived through the horrible times of 1999 to 2002. It was probably even a little longer than that, but I went through the bloodbath of that. And just to describe that to you, and it's different than what we've gone through in recent years, even in 2008. It's different. In 2000, let's say 1998, 2002, there wasn't a single company in my portfolio that couldn't meet this week's payroll. There was at least one every week. And if you had to live through that, it was really a very difficult time. And you could say they didn't finance enough. You could say everyone had gotten carried away by the internet. And the bubble really struck everybody and struck the whole industry. And in the meantime, I had morphed from Alan Patricof Associates into Apax and now had offices in 12 countries. And we were becoming, because as you get bigger, you lose touch with making $500,000 investments. It's not possible anymore. And my partners wanted to do bigger things. And there was a much more drive towards becoming a private equity firm. And so my love was really with venture and startups. So I decided to check out for a while and stayed around in the offices there for 5 or 6 years. But I then spent 3-4 years in the developing world on a pro bono basis, helping the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation and a couple of nonprofits to develop entrepreneurial activity around the world, mostly in Africa and somewhat in Southeast Asia and Latin America. And I loved that time. I was an advisor to the president of Nigeria for several years, and it added an interesting dimension. And then in 2006, the washout of the bubble was over. Apax wasn't going back to venture investing, and I decided it would be a good time to start a new venture firm. So that's when I started Greycroft, and Greycroft was focused on being an internet and media company, media investment firm, excuse me. And I had developed a reputation over many years. I had been in not just doing AOL and doing New York Magazine. I did Details Magazine. I did Q Magazine. I was involved with a lot of media companies. I don't think there was a single deal in the media world that I didn't hear about. And to this day, I still see media deals, although media is not. Greycroft has now stopped doing media deals. So, each firm evolves. Greycroft has now become an AI investing firm and has changed their strategy. But I built Greycroft to be a venture capital firm. Well, in its mission statement, it was to be a venture capital firm. And we had picked the size of $200 million as being the largest fund we would be. Of course, now the biggest fund is $1 billion. But that's what happens. And anyhow, I stayed with that until about 4 years ago when my wife had Alzheimer's. which is an insidious disease. Unfortunately, many of you in this room will end up touching it, whether you like it or not, whether it's a mother, grandmother, wife, somebody will have it that you're related to, and you'll end up having to give some kind of caregiving. So I went through 12 years of that, and I saw what was happening, and that the fastest part of our population is really the older, over 60 market, which is growing a lot faster than those under 18. And I thought that was an interesting area. And I went to conferences, read books and articles. And one day, one of my three sons said to me, Abby Levy is interested in the same thing, and she's going to start a fund. And we knew each other very well because I had been an investor in the Huffington Post with Arianna Huffington. Abby had been the founding president of Thrive Global, which was Arianna's second company. I also started Audible on the way. So, I mean, I've been in the media-related world for a long time. And so we got together, and I think a week or two later, we decided to start a fund together. So we started Primetime Partners, we've been in this just about 4 years old now in October. We made our first investment, and we invest in startups, early stage, pre-seed, some A round of companies that are servicing the elderly market. The way we define it, we call ourselves a horizontal fund. We say we're one of the only horizontal funds, but it's a way of trying to distinguish ourselves. We're not fintech, we're not consumer, we're not health tech, we're not climate, energy. We're across the board. We'll do anything as long as you're focused on a customer who's older. And there are a lot of people who are getting older, and they have money to spend, and they're living longer. If you read my book, at the end of it, I say I could test you if you've read it. It tells you I'm going to live to 114, and I've been saying that for the last 15 years. So I'm doing all right. If I'd run the marathon, that would have helped the cause. But this broken hip won't mean anything. I'll get through that very quickly. So my point is that's the market I'm focused on now. And going back to what I said before, I don't hide things. I mean, we've been in business 4 years. We've had nothing go public. Nothing's gotten sold. We've closed 5 companies. We have 16 that have had upticks, and the rest of them are flat. And I think they're realistically valued. But it's a very interesting area. They're now, I guess if I tried hard, I probably could name 6 or 8 firms that are focusing on this older generation. But almost every firm is a bigger firm, or otherwise is touching the market in some way. If a deal comes into their healthcare or their fintech, servicing our market, they're making investments. So we're not in the market alone.
Alan, that was going to be a little bit of my next question. How has the market reacted to your focus? Are you seeing more interest from the market? And what have you learned about the entrepreneurs building for specifically this space?
Well, when Abby and I started, we had a similar objective. I guess we could afford to do it personally, that we wanted to make money for the fund and ourselves. We've invested, by the way, 10% of we just are in the process of finishing up our second fund, and we committed 10% of the capital. It's going to be a $60 million fund. The first one was 50. But we set out to not only make money for our investors and ourselves, but to become thought leaders and really proselytize for this market, because ageism is something that's as bad as, well, I don't want to say as bad, but it's another ism like feminism or racism or one of the isms that has challenges. And people, whether they want to or not, are very prejudicial about older people. They think of people who are aging, that they're over the top. That's not a big market. The millennials are the ones who spend money. The millennials are the ones who adopt new ideas. They know how to deal with technology. The fact is, a lot of you will become older very soon. So we have a market that is expanding, and as a result of COVID, actually, they become a lot more techno literate, and there are all kinds of opportunities. But we have been pioneering and trying to educate the market. And I would say that when we started out, we decided to speak at every conference. We hired this young lady's PR firm, which did a great job. Did you do a good job for us? We still use them, but we spent 10% of our revenues on paying a PR firm. So, but it was not. It was to promote the concept, to promote Primetime, and to promote our portfolio. But because it wasn't going to happen on its own, and so you'll see us on television where we speak at conferences, we chair conferences. Abby's chairing the health conference out in Las Vegas yesterday. She did the Milken conference a month ago. I did the Senior Living Innovation Conference in California a month or so ago. And people are starting companies. And we found that most of the people who are starting up companies in this area are people who have been touched in some way with a healthcare problem, financial problem, or something in their family. They recognize the problem. And that's how they got. So we don't have as sophisticated a startup group came out of business school or engineering school as much as we have a motivated set of entrepreneurs who see an opportunity in a particular area.
So we're going to open up for questions in a second. And anyone who has a question, we have a few copies to give you today. The rest, you'll get them mailed to your address. But before we open up for questions, Alan, so I know that this broken hip is just a bump in the road, but how do you keep so healthy? I think everyone here wants to know.
This is a bump in the road. It's tough to the title "No Red Lights." My granddaughter was out. She's my youngest granddaughter. I have 7 of them. She's 14, and she walked with me down Park Avenue the other day, and we were halfway down there. She was out of breath, and she was saying, "Now I know why you got the title. I don't pay much attention to red lights, and I live a very active life. I have a very positive attitude." Right, Jessica? No, but I have a very positive. I wake up every morning. I only know the word yes. I'm not one of these people who wakes up and says, "I'm depressed. It's raining out." I am excited every day about opportunities. I keep myself very involved as I am full-time and Primetime. I exercise. I walk every day with my wife. That's how this damn thing happened. I tripped on the street, not in a pothole. My wife and I walked. I'm sorry. I got remarried last year. I forgot to tell you that, which was written up in the New York Times, big story, because it was actually done because it was, in a way, inspiring older people. You could get married, and there's still life ahead. And I try to promote that every day of my life. I had a big birthday two nights ago, actually. And it wasn't a birthday party. It was a birthday celebration. It was a celebration of living 90 years, and I'll see you at 100, if not, maybe 95 even on the way. But I eat a normal life. I have one trick I developed when I was dating my wife. I didn't do it before I started dating her. I don't think, maybe I couldn't have gotten away with anybody else before that. But I would take her out for dinner and go to a nice restaurant, and she'd, like most women, would put their fork in and maybe have one taste or 2 tastes. And I said, "God damn it, I'm not going to spend $50 for a dinner and you're not going to eat it. We're going to split a dinner." And from that time on, we split every single meal. And I tell you, will not starve. I give you my word. You will be shocked because they give you, every restaurant gives you so much. You go in and you got to order a branzino, and there are 2 big pieces of branzino. A cutlet, there are 2 or 3 pieces. And we even split our drink, so we drink less. We have one drink. We split the appetizer, main course, dessert. She has tea and I have coffee. But it's not like we do it as a ritual. It's just like normal. I mean, we wouldn't think about it. And I have a trainer 3 times a week, and we go to Pilates once a week. And what else do you know? Do you know anything else? What do I do differently? I don't know if I do anything else. I think that's about it. That I keep active. I think if I stay relevant, where I see friends of mine who are getting older, and I have obviously a lot of people who are older who are friends, they lose their relevancy, and because they don't have any active thing going on in their life. They go to Florida, they go to Arizona, wherever it is, and it doesn't help the situation. I think that staying relevant, working regularly is a big part of it. So if you have parents that are at that stage, encourage them to keep moving. I read a lot. I mean, I read the FT, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal every day. I read Forbes pretty often. I read the Atlantic. I read books. Anyone remembers books? I've started a couple of publishing companies, by the way, on the way. And I'm very curious. I mean, I'm interested in what other people do, and I'm interested in what's going on around me. I haven't said this in many years, but years ago when I was speaking about venture capital, and they'd say, how do you know if someone would be a good venture capitalist? I say, I'll tell you, like a very plebeian type of experience. If you're sitting at dinner and there's a really spectacular looking plate with great design, and you can tell it's, not cheap. If you pick it up and turn it over to look and see who made it, that's a good test. I mean, it's a very simplistic test, but I'm saying to you that if you have the curiosity of seeing a product, see a service, if you read about something, and you stay active, not get interested in new companies, new things, and if it helps, that's what I think helps me.
Any more questions?
I'm not boring. Ask my wife; it drives her crazy. And my wife works, by the way, too. She's an art consultant, an active one.
The question was, who did you fundraise from for your first fund in the 1970s, and what kind of fee structure did you have?
It was actually 1.5 and 10. I invented it. I didn't know I didn't know what I was doing. It was all friends. And I will tell you that in my current fund, which probably is my 25th, I have no idea what number it is. It's because there's been several firms. I still have at least three investors who invested in my first fund, including this. I did include the guy who wrote 0000. He has not committed to the next fund. And I wrote him this letter today to tell him he's a big whiner.
The question was, can you share some controversial decisions you made over your career?
What controversial decision? I think my sons would tell you leaving APAC was a stupid thing to do. You make a lot more money renting $80 billion than you do renting $50 million, I will tell you. So I left a lot of money behind. And Greycroft now runs $3 billion, so I left money behind there. I mean, you could say, although it's not a bad decision, I sold Apple. I invested $315,000 in Apple. I did research for this when I was doing the book. That's how I know it. I still have the certificate, $315,000 and in 1979. And I sold it in 1984 after it had gone public. We made about 20 times on our money or so. That same $315,000 would be worth over $7 billion today. And by the way, I have to say on that particular deal, we did not sell it. We distributed it to the investors because that was much more prevalent in those days because you could do something with it. The company was public and had liquidity. And I always wonder whether one of those 30 or 40 investors I had by mistake kept it, but I have no idea. I didn't keep mine.
The question was, do you have any advice to people starting their own funds today?
I would say be realistic about the size of the investment you want to raise, the fund you want to raise. We raised $50 million. With my background, I could have probably gone out and raised more than $50 million when I started. But I don't know. It was a new idea. Abby and I hadn't worked together. It was a new firm, new concept. But I thought that was a realistic number. I mean, for me, it would have been 25 million would have been probably too little to do. But 50, and it didn't happen overnight. Believe me, we had to convince people of the concept. So I think, and now that we're raising our second fund, I didn't go from 50 to 100. We went from 50 to 60 because we're still, we have no DPI. I'm realistic, and the market's been, we've gone through COVID. We started fundraising on March 19th, 2020, whatever it was, first week of COVID. And so I'd say be realistic. I'd say don't be realistic about the portfolio you build and don't kid yourself as to some of these make believe values that unsophisticated people are putting on them. And be prepared to have discipline and walk away from deals that are, don't just fill up the portfolio because you want to fill it up. Make sure you've got a portfolio that has, we have an inventory that doesn't have to. What we're going through right now is everybody's writing down their inventory. That's what's happened. And they made all these investments. And we did some of it too, by the way, in 21, 22, that the market was very euphoric in this past period. And a lot of stupid investments were made, a lot of follow-on investments, a lot of people in the hedge fund business got into this, private equity got into venture, and deals got overpriced. And so now we're going through down rounds, we're going through flat rounds, because if their companies are any good at all, their progress is catching up perhaps of what the value was on 2 or 3 years ago. So accept the reality of that's the marketplace, and don't too many entrepreneurs get upset because my last round was at 30 million pre. This round's got to be at 40. Well, maybe it should be at 25, and that's where the right price. But at least it will stay alive.
Well, we'll take one more question from Jessica.
The last question was from Jessica Schaefer, who asked Alan to remind everyone some of the basic rules of life Alan has taught her over the years.
Cash is king. Free cash flow is very important. Thank you for that. That's very good, Jessica. I don't usually talk about that. In fact, I was just talking to someone yesterday. I'll tell you a trick about building a reputation. Learn how to write handwriting and writing notes to people. Some of the most prominent people I know, Bill Clinton included, always has a written hand in a typed letter that someone typed. He has something written in handwriting. I can tell you all the prominent, I just threw that name out, but lots of people. I was just with a young guy who works for me at home before, because I've been recuperating, and I have a stock of handwritten letters I've been writing to people. But writing notes, I can tell you, I know the people who, Warren Buffett, if you send him a letter, he will send you back your letter, and on the bottom of it, he will write in ink your message. He doesn't want to waste paper. But I have a policy which, thank you. I'm going to take you around with me. I return every phone call I get within the day I get it, or the next day if it's impossible. But you build a reputation. I hate people who don't return phone calls. I hate that. And if you call me and you don't call back, I will hound you till I find out why you called. What else you got there? Oh, it sucks. That yeah. That's the other thing is that, don't forget. I remember these. It's your job to remember, Carly. Everything in life is cumulative. This I really believe in very strongly. It's a good place if you want to end after this or another question, perhaps. Is we all have gotten to where we are because of, in my case, because of a long history of 50 years in this business. Everyone, people say, how do you raise, and by the way, it's not so simple now raising money. How did you raise your last fund in 3 months? I say to them, 50 years in 3 months. And your reputation you build, and this I do preach to my kids too. People don't forget things. Really very appreciative Jessica mentioned that. About 10 years ago, it only started about maybe 15 years ago. People would walk up to me every day of the week. It still happens, but it started then, and say, "You're Alan Patricof, right? You don't remember me, but." That's why everything started. You don't remember me, but, because I don't remember it. I worked for you in 1972. You interviewed me in 72. You were the only person who returned my phone call. You wrote me a note. I was an entrepreneur starting up, and you took the meeting. People don't forget. And that's how you build a reputation. And I was very nervous. I mean, I'm not bullshitting. I mean, I really, that someone was going to come and say, "You son of a bitch, I remember. You don't remember me, but you screwed me in my first business." And I honestly have never, And don't you all screw it up for me now. But no, I've never gotten someone who walked up to me. I'm sure they're out there who will, they just probably avoid me, but that to me is very important to me personally. And that's how you build a reputation. And that's how you build multiple funds. And that's how you build a firm. And that's how I'm still in the business at age 90.
Well, Alan, I'm deeply inspired and thankful. I know everyone here is going to come out and try to conquer the world after listening to you. And we don't want to pass up this opportunity without congratulating you and singing you happy birthday. Hey to you. Happy birthday, dear Alan. Happy birthday.
But you got to Alfred help me. Whoa.
Thank you so much, Alan.
The Fintech Leaders podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.